Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. So breaking today, President Biden has announced new mandates for vaccines after saying earlier this year that he would not push mandates for vaccines. Per CBS, quote, Biden announced today that all employers with 100 or more employees will be required to mandate COVID-19 vaccines or require testing at least once a week, and they'll have to provide paid time off. The new rule will impact over 80 million workers in the private sector, end quote. So in other words, you have President Biden who's going to torpedo the economy. We're going to talk more about that in depth tomorrow and a little bit more about it later today. Now, much has been said of the vaccine hesitant among us, of which I totally am one of them. I have no problem admitting that. I don't see why I should. And I'll give the obligatory caveat. I totally believe in vaccinations for people who are not smart enough to differentiate between opposition or hesitation about the coronavirus vaccine and all of the other vaccines. Having questions or hesitancies about the coronavirus vaccine does not mean that you are anti-vax, because that implies that you're against all vaccines, which isn't true. I don't think for about 99% of the people out there. I've had vaccines. My kids have vaccines. It's none of anybody's damn business. Step off. But when it comes to this particular vaccine, I have questions. And I'm among the tens of millions of people who also have questions about this particular vaccine. Now, in less hysterical times, we would have regarded a bit of hesitancy about a brand new vaccine as normal, especially with, again, a brand new technology based in mRNA, especially when it wasn't experimental, because it was experimental. You could sit here and say it was FDA approved. One of them got the FDA approval. That's fine. But it started as an experimental vaccination. It was fast-tracked, I get it, under the emergency authorization that from the White House, and they strongly recommended it, not just from the vulnerable, but even people who weren't vulnerable. Actually, they wanted everybody to get it, even though really the fatalities were with the older citizens. Okay, fine. Namely, they wanted healthy young people or people that have already had coronavirus and have natural immunity to take the vaccine too, which doesn't make sense to me. But we're living in hysterically politically polarized times, as you all know, and the vaccine hesitant, they began to purposely be conflated with the anti-vax people. So we've lost all nuance in this discussion. I've lost all motivation to be courteous. And instead, we began to demonize millions of people who were simply just curious. They had questions, and instead of answering their questions, people decided to berate them. Now, we had a choice as a society: either be transparent about COVID data, talk about signals in the VAERS system. I get it, not every case that's reported to VAERS is actually vetted, just like every case that the CDC was counting as it related to child fatalities with coronavirus. But it might indicate that some people maybe perhaps have adverse reactions to that particular new vaccine. We could have chosen to encourage the free flow of information rather than censoring people who asked questions about the vaccine itself. We could have recognized and respected people's different health situations and risk profiles, but we took the path our administration and legacy press decided to take, to denigrate and insult anybody who was vaccine hesitant and call them anti-vaxxers, which is absolutely anti-intellectual. You know, we said, people would say despicable things like it's the pandemic of the unvaccinated, like our president did again yesterday in this tweet. He says, quote, "The pandemic of the unvaccinated is a tragedy that is preventable. People are dying and will die from COVID-19 who don't have to. If you haven't gotten vaccinated, do it now. It could save your life and the lives of those you love," end quote. I don't think that Biden's dumb. I do think that he's petty. First of all, he's tweeting about the pandemic because he desperately needs you to think about anything other than his imploding presidency, tanking in the polls, and the FUBAR withdrawal in Afghanistan. But Biden also knows that we all know so much more about these vaccines, including things we don't want to admit out loud, like the vaccinated actually can still spread, then they can transmit the virus, and the vaccinated can still contract the virus. Just ask Reverend Jesse Jackson and boxer Oscar De La Hoya, who are both vaccinated, and actually De La Hoya was just released, from what I understand, from the hospital. So the president knows, as does anyone who's paying attention, that at this point, all the vaccine, in fact, Rochelle Walensky said this from the CDC too, that it does help protect people from the most severe of the COVID symptoms. But of course, we know in Israel that that's already totally not true, as their hospitals began filling up with vaccinated people. And increasingly, it seems our own health agencies recognize that the vaccine's efficacy, it was waning, and its protection tends to decline rather fast. So they need a third booster, which apparently this is recommended now by our government. And then there will be more boosters after that, and boosters into perpetuity, because now the other thing that people don't want to say out loud, COVID is endemic. All this to say that the president knows very well that the vaccine hesitant are not causing the pandemic. And he knows that the Communist Chinese Party, who made the Frankenstein coronavirus with U.S. taxpayer dollars, they actually, I'm just going to say it, you can sit here and say that they contributed to it by not actually handling a lockdown. It came from your lab. It's sus. You started this whole thing. And of course, they were aided by Dr. Fauci. And again, our tax dollars. The president, the legacy press, and Democrats, even many in the Republican Party, could all admit this, but they don't, which just makes the vaccine hesitant more hesitant. And it makes an already hesitant person wonder, gosh, I wonder what else they're hiding. But rather than answer legitimate questions, our broken institutions accuse the vaccine hesitant of being like animals who ingest horse paste with ivermectin, rather than take the sophisticated, pinkies up, mRNA vaccine meant for humans. Of course, ivermectin is prescribed for humans too, and was given a Nobel Prize, and the media knows this. But why let that get in the way of comparing vaccine-hesitant people to animals, especially if it's politically useful? Also, you know what? I had overnight oats this morning. Do you know who else eats oats? Horses. And lambs eat oats, and does eat oats, and yeah, I could go on. The vaccine hesitant have become even more hesitant. So sometimes I kind of wonder if aliens are performing this grand experiment to see who's going to ask questions when things don't make sense, and who will obediently say and do anything that the authorities tell them. I'm kind of digressing, because now you can throw another factor into the already mountainous pile of reasons waiting to be asking questions about these vaccines. Case in point, I wonder why people are hesitant. This new study that's been ordered by the NIH just now recently, it's been ordered. The National Institutes of Health has announced a $1.67 million study to investigate reports, thousands of them, that suggest that COVID-19 vaccine may have an unexpected impact on reproductive health, and that the NIH has awarded 5 universities one-year supplemental grants totaling over $1.6 million to study links between irregular and heavier periods and COVID-19 vaccines. So why are they doing these studies? Because I thought everyone already had the answers. Well, it turns out that for a long time now, there have been many, many women, thousands of them, asking questions about menstrual cycles, saying that they were affected after they had their vaccine. And in fact, the CDC now acknowledges, for all of you YouTube nuts that want to sit here and be like, censor, censor. I know you guys hate facts and science, but the world's not flat. Bear with me. CDC actually has acknowledged that 3,000 women, over 3,000, have reported heavier than normal or abnormal menstrual cycles to the CDC's vaccine reporting system. There's enough that they've actually now finally began a study on it about a year after all this has been reported, almost a year. So the NIH ordering these 5 studies in which researchers will recruit 400,000 to 500,000 participants, including adolescents and transgender women and non-binary people. That vaccine must be hella potent. I mean, it's affecting even men's menstrual cycles. It's even affecting people's menstrual cycles who don't have any gender, which is super concerning, if we want to follow science, because men and people who have no gender can't have menstrual cycles. I mean, if you want to identify a nosebleed as one, I guess go ahead. But other than that, if you're a dude, like I said, and you're bleeding, please seek emergency help. But seriously, it's clear that the CDC and NIH is just kind of getting around to acknowledging what the vaccine hesitant people who've had questions that they ask them and they want answers, what they have long understood, that something's kind of going on with women's menstrual cycles after they take the vaccine. Now, remember, it was just May 19th that we were told by Dr. Impending Doom, the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky. She stated, remember, that there was no reason, none, to believe that these vaccines affect your menstrual cycle at all. Absolutely no connection, none whatsoever. Watch.
We have no reason to believe that getting vaccinated should change your menstrual cycle or make your periods any heavier.
We're just going to spend millions of taxpayer dollars looking at studies on it. So there it is. Just a few months ago, nothing to see here from CDC Director Rochelle Walensky as far as effects on women's menstrual cycles. Jab away, girls. Have at it, ladies. Wait, what do you mean? You're vaccine hesitant? Maybe because you're having a baby, maybe because you're trying to have a baby, or maybe because you're heading towards menopause, and naturally you're a little, you got some questions after hearing friends reporting strange happenings with their lady business after taking that vaccine. How could you be so selfish? Take the jab already, and while you're at it, go in the kitchen and make the world a sandwich. You could kill someone if you don't get vaccinated. Listen up. for those vaccine hesitants. You're the very reason for the pandemic. Isn't that what we're hearing? It was at about that moment that every woman born in the last 50 years thought to themselves, wait, hold up. What happened to my body, my choice? The mantra of all feminist mantras. Where did all those liberals go that would pull this mantra out to justify their right to, in the life of a baby, as a form of birth control, right? It's in the way, I'm not going to look cute in my swimsuit on my Aruba cruise. Remember those feminists, the ones that are always reminding us that the government has no business violating women's bodily autonomy and right to privacy? That is so yesterday. Get with it. Because today the government is mandating that you take a jab from a vaccine that may have a connection to some irregular menstrual activity. And what if you say no? We'll just take your livelihood, says the government. We'll make it impossible for you to leave your house. If you're in New York, maybe we'll bar you from entering a supermarket. Doesn't sound like a government that respects the very real concerns of women or the bodily rights of women. Where's what's her face, that bartender up from Brooklyn, AOC, who says that the Texas Heartbeat Act is about raping and controlling women now? If forcing women to take a vaccine that may affect their lady parts isn't about control, then what is? Oh, but it's radio silence from AOC and from Democrats, which makes the vaccine hesitant, yes, grow ever more hesitant. Think about how Rochelle Walensky said, with complete confidence, we have no reason to believe that getting vaccinated should change your menstrual cycle or make your period any heavier. That's her direct quote. But 3 months later, NIH and CDC, they're working together. A study, 500,000 plus women, to look into reports from over 3,000 women of a possible connection of menstrual cycle irregularities. I'm not even getting into how you're told to wait if you're going to go get a mammogram and you're considering about getting a vaccine. Yeah, look that one up. So you can imagine why some women who are expecting or who are trying to be expecting might not feel totally comforted by Rochelle Walensky saying this either. Watch.
There is a lot of misinformation out there, and this is a very common question. We have no reason to suspect that these vaccines result in any infertility now or in the future. And in fact, it's implausible that they would.
No, it is so not going to impact fertility. I mean, they have no studies whatsoever proving any of this. But how dare you ask a question? I guess you want people to die. Rest assured, ladies, and if it turns out that they're wrong, I guess that they could always do a study to find out after you've already taken it and chased it with 3 to 4 boosters. Who needs studies anyway when we have our feelings to guide us? Like Rochelle Walensky. Remember, Dr. Walensky uses the COVID force. It's a mystical energy to guide her when it comes to guiding us through the pandemic. Watch.
Now is one of those times when I have to share the truth and I have to hope and trust you will listen. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to lose the script and I'm going to reflect on the recurring feeling I have of impending doom. We have so much to look forward to, so much promise and potential of where we are, and so much reason for hope. But right now I'm scared.
Why is she saying that she's pausing the script? I mean, she's literally still clearly looking up at her script. Golly, someone give her a Xanax. She's not even talking about science. She's just talking about feelings. I just point this out because we're always told to follow the science. How many times have you heard that this past year? Follow the science, follow the science, follow the science. I hear it in my sleep, follow the science. But the health agencies don't. The CDC director talks about her feelings of impending doom. And then she tells us just a few months ago with absolute certainty that there's no connection between any lady issues and the vaccine at all. But now they've ordered an in-depth study on this exact, very specific thing. And I want to be clear, they don't know if there's a connection to any menstrual irregularities or reproductive effects. They're just looking into it. Could be a psychosomatic connection. They have said people's stress levels after being vaccinated may indeed have an effect on their cycles. Could be possible. Ordering the study doesn't mean there's a connection. That's the point. But goodness, are we really going to keep demonizing the vaccine hesitant? Especially when our health agency leaders talk like this. Listen to this quote from NIH Director Diana Bianchi. See if you feel confident after hearing what she has to say. She says, quote, our goal is to provide menstruating people, I'll repeat, menstruating people with information. I immediately don't want to listen to her just because of that unscientific word. I just want to just take this whole screen grab and throw it in the trash with information mainly as to what to expect, because I think that was the biggest issue. Nobody expected it to affect the menstrual system because the information wasn't being collected in the early vaccine studies, end quote. How are you the director of NIH and you don't know that women menstruate? It's not menstruating people, it's women. It's people with vaginas and uteruses. Uteri? Ovaries. All those things, lady parts. So we now know that Diana Bianchi is serving an ideology. That's not science. That's feeling and politics. It's not exactly confidence inspiring. Second, she admits that weren't even collecting information on whether the vaccines were affecting women's menstrual cycles in early vaccine studies. So she's admitting we never bothered to look into the possible connection between menstrual cycle irregularities and the vaccine until now. But shut up and take it, you selfish anti-science maggots, right? Who don't care about others. I don't know about you, but I interviewed my hairstylist before I made an appointment. I kind of like to find out the results of things before lining up to inject stuff or even have my hair cut, right? Based on brand new practices or technologies. And if that makes me quote unquote vaccine hesitant, okay. But if it doesn't make me anti-vax, nor does it make millions of other women who have legitimate concerns for themselves, their daughters, their wives, their sisters, their friends, doesn't make them anti-vax either. But to berate us for it does make you sexist. And it also doesn't make us selfish or evil, nor does it make us the cause of the pandemic. I don't have enough middle fingers for that sentiment. So I'll just say this. The president and these health agencies ought to be ashamed of themselves, reinforcing bigoted sexist notions like pandemic of the unvaccinated. It's evil and it's dangerous and it's bigoted. And the president, more so than anybody, should know better than to demonize people in order to incentivize them to get vaxxed. And worse, it's ineffective, as it's resulting in women and people in general becoming even more vaccine hesitant. So coming up, pandemic unemployment benefits expired and people were mad because Ted Cruz said to get a job. Also, what does this mean now that Joe Biden is demanding a mandate for companies that have 100 or fewer, at minimum, 100 or more employees? We're going to talk to Carol Roth. She is the author of The War on Small Business. She'll join us to discuss all of this next. How much equity do you have in your home? Cybercrime experts are alerting homeowners that the more equity they have, the greater the chance that criminals could target them. Home title theft is one of the fastest growing crimes, and home title lock, America's leader in home title protections, warning homeowners that they could potentially be victims and not even know it. So here's how. Cyber thieves search hundreds of public databases for high equity homes. They find the home's online title. They could forge your signature stating that you sold your home, take out loans using your equity. Insurance and common identity theft programs are garbage. They're not going to cover you. Protect your most valuable asset. Register your address to see if you could potentially be a victim and receive a complete title history of your home, a $100 value for free. Visit HometitleLock.com. So pandemic unemployment benefits have expired for 7.5 million people, yet there are a record amount of jobs available thanks to it's a labor shortage. It really is. Plus, in addition to that, President Joe Biden announced today it's not just going to be a mandate for the federal government workforce to get vaccinated. Now, all companies, and apparently through a new OSHA rule, all companies that have 100 or more employees, they have to have their employees vaccinated, or they have to do weekly tests if they're unvaccinated, which raises a whole bunch of other questions. What mechanism is OSHA going to use? How are they going to even enforce this? How is this going to affect businesses? How does this not torpedo the economy? I'm made of questions, which is why we brought a very smart and lovely woman, Carol Roth, former investment banker. She is author of The War on Small Business, and she's here to talk about it. Carol, always so good to see you.
You as well. What a mess, Dana. I know this is new in the last couple hours and we're trying to get our heads wrapped around it, but it seems like the Biden administration, anytime something is unconstitutional, they try to kick it off to some agency to try to end around it. It's really a disaster.
That's a great point that you just mentioned too, because if they just kind of shrug it off and say, oh, this is OSHA's responsibility, they're going to have to deal with it, it does sort of, at least optically, makes it seem like they're less involved. And that's the thing. I mean, I know that for OSHA, they go out and they do inspections, and these businesses have to comply with these regulations, and these businesses also assume liability for certain things. That's like kind of an open question. We don't know about that. So Carol, we're just now getting the economy back up and going. What is this going to do to it?
Yeah, I mean, I would actually push back on that a little and say the economy is still not up and going. It sort of looks that way because we've consolidated the economy amongst these big businesses that continue to, post huge revenues and to gain market value. But there are a lot of smaller and mid-sized businesses that are struggling. And every time you put out a rule like this, anytime you're taking away freedom and choice, whether it is from the workers or the business or both, you're moving more towards the central planning consolidation of the economy, which should be a really big concern for everyone. And we have a giant challenge. We have almost 11 million job openings based on the last JOLTS report, which came out a couple of days ago. It is historic, and that is completely an outgrowth, not of a rip-roaring economy, but of central planning intervention and thinking that they know better and completely disrupting the economy. So now you're going to have a new set of rules, a new layer of rules, and it's really scary for people who like to talk about, your body, your choice, and your choice this and that. Your labor should be your choice. And they're starting to tell people, well, we're sorry, if you don't comply with what we do and what we say, you can't have a job. And this is going to this new rule that we're seeing with vaccination. We're seeing the movement of the PRO Act through Congress. And it's an administration that's really pushing this consolidation amongst big government, big business, and big special interests.
You brought up a really good point there, Carol, when you're talking about your labor really is your own, and the PRO Act, and then also with this, that's a very good point. Even getting into, the whole bake the cake stuff. It's like, who actually owns and gets to decide how your labor is distributed?
Yeah, I mean, there is no principle, and I think that that's the part that drives somebody like me crazy. I'm a pretty strict constitutionalist. I like small government. And it seems like the rules about, what is your choice, or when the business gets to make a choice or the government gets to make a choice, shifts based on the whim of the people who are in charge, which means that there is no principle at all, and should be very concerning to everyone, because we see the outgrowth of this. And I talk about this in the War on Small Business a bit in terms of the consolidation towards the big businesses. If you are smaller and you're decentralized, it's much harder for you to keep up, whether it's with these regulations or increased costs or increased taxes, or shoving union labor down your throat, or them trying to get rid of 59 million gig workers. It really does take away these smaller players, which stand for freedom, choice, and basically economic freedom.
That's a great point. Talking to Carol Roth, whose book War on Small Business is a must read. She gets into all of this stuff. And Carol, with that too, you brought up a really good point in these mid-sized businesses. It's like the businesses that maybe they have 120 employees. Well, they're going to be hit by this mandate. And I would imagine that, I just remember when the whole Obamacare thing passed, and there were rules about how many hours somebody had to have in order to qualify for the company to provide them with health insurance. Do you think we're going to see a repeat of that with something like this, with this?
Yeah, I mean, the number is completely arbitrary. If you go by the SBA definition of what a small business, usually it's up to 500 employees. I know a lot of us would look at that as a larger small business or a medium-sized business, but it's certainly not the scope of a Target or an Amazon or a Walmart. And just looking at this new mandate, if it were to stay in effect, it looks like the fines are something like $14,000 per incident, which is tremendous financial burden, as well as an administrative burden. at a time when you have a huge disruption in the supply chain because of central planning, when you're having a hard time finding employees as it is, and now you're going to eliminate part of the workforce. And whether it is that, you just had COVID and you have natural immunity, or you decide that you don't want to get it for whatever reason, now it's the government saying you can't go into the workforce because you're not complying. And those businesses who are having just a terrible time trying to attract and retain talent are now going to have to contend with this. But you know who's going to be fine, Dana? It's going to be those big businesses that have the access to capital that keep going up in value. Go figure.
Yeah, the Amazons and all the other big corporations, they're going to be completely fine. They don't have a problem with having this mandate. And I would imagine if there's any kind of liability that's associated with it, which I don't even know if that's going to be addressed, how that's going to work. I don't even think OSHA's rules even finalized on this. They're totally fine with that too, because they have the pockets to do it. They're huge companies. So you're right. This really does. It eliminates all of, really a huge number of small businesses or larger small businesses. But that's, again, that's the driver of something like 60%, according to SBA, of job creation. They are hit again within barely 2-year time. I'm amazed that some of these businesses have stayed open as long as they have and actually continue to because of all of this.
Yeah, and think about it from the workers' perspective as well, with the fact that we still have more than 5 million jobs that we haven't recovered from the government's reaction to the pandemic. As I said, around 11 million job openings. If you're somebody who's thinking about re-entering the workforce, even perhaps if you are vaccinated, you're watching this lunacy and you're saying there's so much uncertainty, because once the administration says one thing, a couple months ago, they may change their mind, and that may affect the trajectory of what's happening. So if you're somebody who has kids that just got back to school, are you feeling certain that we're not going to shut down again? If you stayed out of the workforce for some other reason, do you have certainty about what path we're going down? Why would you re-enter the workforce now with that level of uncertainty hanging over your head? And that's the only thing that the government should be providing. I mean, we're 18 months in to 15 days to slow the spread. We should have some level of certainty about how we go around and live our lives and mitigate with the virus, which some outlets are saying could be with us forever now. And they're just intentionally providing that level of uncertainty that's disruptive to people's lives and to the economy.
I wish, Carol, that they would just say, okay, it's endemic. We're just going to have to rethink our approach to this and just be honest about it. But I feel like we're going to have this conversation, a year later, and it's going to be, well, you're on your 20th booster. So we're just, continuing to go all through that. Talking with Carol Roth, whose book on War on Small Business is a fantastic read. And Carol, where do you see, because I imagine that there's going to be legal fights, which is a whole other issue. But how are businesses going to react to this? What is going to be the outlook? Like what reaction will Wall Street have? How are they even going to be able to plan ahead in the future with this kind of stuff? As you said, talking about the uncertainty, what does this look like in the next year?
Yeah, so I think that we have to remember that Wall Street and the stock market is no longer the economy. It's been completely separated and completely disrupted, particularly by Fed intervention over the last decade plus. So it's not really reflective of what's going on in the entire economy. It's very reflective what's going on with these bigger businesses that I think actually probably love this because, again, it's anti-competitive in many ways, and the more resources you have, the better you are to handle something like this. So I think that you're going to have this sort of separation in the economy of the haves and the have-nots, which is just a continuation of the picking of winners and losers we've seen by government mandates over the past 18 months. And in a way, even if there is a little bit of a slowdown from an economic growth situation. Unfortunately, in this bizarre world that we're living in with the Fed disruption, sometimes the bad news becomes good news for the stock market because it means that the Fed is going to continue their intervention. It gives them a reason to say, oh, well, growth isn't as great as we thought it was going to be. Gee, I wonder why that is. So we're going to have to continue to make purchases. We're going to have to, of assets. We're going to have to continue to hold down interest rates. And that's all that Wall Street really cares about right now. So unfortunately, what's bad news for real people on Main Street who are working, who are trying to get their lives back to normal and their economic lives back to normal, ends up being a good thing for Wall Street. And the separation, the disconnection between the two is really a big issue in terms of where the country goes from an economic standpoint, over the long term.
Yeah, what a mess we are in. My goodness. So this is going to be interesting to watch how this plays out, because I have a feeling there are a lot of businesses that are not going to be too keen on either complying with the mandate, and they're not going to be too keen on further lockdowns when we have another variant that comes up. It's cyclical at this point. Good heavens. Carol Roth, one of my favorite people. So good to see you. Thank you so much. The book is War on Small Business. Go out and get it. Carol, thanks so much. Good to see you.
Great to be with you as always, Dana.
Of course. All right, folks, America changed profoundly after 9/11. Coming up on the 20th, I don't want to say anniversary. That kind of suggests that it's sort of like a happy time, right? But 20 years later. Up next, retired FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon will join us to discuss what's changed. Has anything changed? Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company that serves premium coffee to people who love America. And they develop their explosive roast profiles with the same mission focus that they learned while serving our great nation. And with every purchase that you make, Black Rifle Coffee gives back. So in 2020, they donated over 6 million cups of coffee to veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. Their high-quality coffee beans are imported all the way from Colombia and Brazil and carefully roasted at their facilities in Tennessee and Utah. They have a blend called Lava Panther. That's all you really need to know. So although the temperatures are cooling off, except in Texas and Florida and pretty much everywhere else below Kentucky, don't forget to keep enjoying the great outdoors fueled by Black Rifle Coffee. And the best way to do it is to join the Black Rifle Coffee Club. And when you join, Eagles celebrate and your chosen brew is roasted, packaged, and shipped free right to your door. In fact, they may even, for an upcharge, have an Eagle roast it for you, or not roast it for you, but make it for you in your kitchen. I might be lying about that, so don't sue me. You can also get special discounts, that's real, gain access to exclusive products, and much more, also real. Purchase at blackriflecoffee.com/Dana. Use code Dana at checkout to get 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. After the September 11th attacks, and we're coming up on 20 years now, which is crazy, Americans have seen the curtailing of a lot of civil liberties and even more mass surveillance. So how concerned should we all be, especially when you look at these very, very deep political divisions? Where do we stand now on national security 20 years later? Bobby Chacon is a retired FBI special agent, comes from a family of service too, father and brother in NYPD. He's the writer and producer for After the Fall podcast. He joins us now to discuss this. Bobby, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me, Dana.
Of course, I know you have a very up close and personal experience with this. You were there. You saw the plane hit the first tower. I remember I had just turned 21 years old actually, and I was standing in my living room and I was watching these towers fall. And it was hard to take in just watching it on a monitor, on a television monitor. I can't imagine what it was like to be there in person. Now here we are, fast forward 20 years, and there was a lot said about what we could do to be proactive and protect ourselves against anything like this ever happening again. How would you grade us 20 years from now on that effort?
That's a really tough question and an important question, I think. And I think there's several answers depending on how you're looking at it. If you're looking at it from my perspective, from the FBI perspective, we've done well. In fact, we've knocked down some of what we call walls that existed at the time that prevented the intelligence agencies from providing the criminal agents working these types of cases with the proper information that was withheld from us at that time that could have made a difference. I think that when you talk about certain NSA programs and certain, of these mega collection programs that the FBI doesn't really get involved in. Our agents are, kind of nose to the ground, focused on putting criminals in jail and criminals being terrorists as well. We just don't have the time to collect or the resources to collect, that kind of data. That's some people on the other side of the fence, in the government. And so I think the grades are a little different there. I think the grades of the FBI we solved this crime very quickly. We rounded up the people that were responsible. Obviously, the 19 hijackers were dead, but the people that financed them, the people that helped support them, all over the globe, were rounded up, were hunted down. And some of them were brought to justice via drone strikes. Some of them were brought to Gitmo. They were dealt with in a variety of ways, but we got the people that were responsible. Thanks to the U.S. Navy SEALs, we got the ultimate guy responsible when Bin Laden was killed. We have KSM, who was the main planner now down in Gitmo. So I think that there's been some overreach in some collection. But that means all that information is sitting somewhere. I don't know who's looking at it or how or why it was collected. But that's you're kind of talking about these macro issues versus these much more focused issues. My job and the agents that I work with, all they were interested in is going after bad guys and gathering evidence that would help us put those bad guys in jail.
And to that point, you were talking about just some of the not getting certain information. And I don't think, like in the couple of years after 9/11, I don't think that the American people were just quite aware of how little information certain departments, they weren't sharing with each other, whether it was immigration and dealing with visas and then having that shared with the FBI so that the FBI knew what to check for. That was such a huge problem. And it seems like we're kind of having some of those same issues now. It seemed like it was improved a little bit. By how much? I mean, is it easier for the FBI and for law enforcement now to get that type of information? I know that, I think, I think George Bush even had to use some executive authority to get involved immediately after to change that.
Yeah, there was something called the wall at the time, and this was something that kept intelligence agencies from sharing certain things with criminal agents like myself, who might go into court and divulge that stuff, and then their sources and methods could be compromised. So I think we have done better on that front. That's one of the fronts that we've done better. In other words, the CIA has people sitting in the Joint Terrorism Task Force. We have FBI agents that actually go to the CIA schools and spend time working in CIA offices around the world, and then they come back to the FBI. So I think there's been an interchange of personnel. I think we have a greater understanding of what each other does and the roles, that we both serve in the overall objective of keeping America safe.
Right. And I know that you've tweeted a little bit as well about Afghanistan and the drawdown and the effect, obviously, that's going to have on our ability to get information, because there's so many, as you said, there's so many moving parts of this. I mean, you have just on the ground getting information, and then you have, CIA, you have FBI, you have NSA. And then looking at Afghanistan, one of the things, Bobby, that I've heard from so many of my friends who've served there, they were saying it took 20 years. It's like the same refrain. They didn't share talking points. They're just like, it took 20 years to build that network and get information, and it is gone now, entirely gone. Which is a priceless thing to have. How does that end up all the way down the line affect the ability of whether it's FBI agents here in the United States, law enforcement, to get information and be able to act, if now we have kind of a dark spot there on the other side of the world due to no light, no info?
Unfortunately, that question, in my mind, can only be answered in a very dark way. And over time, I think that over time, Afghanistan could become exactly what it was. It was an incubator for Al Qaeda and maybe incubator now for other groups, both Al Qaeda and other groups. And I've been in my After the Fall podcast. I talked to an FBI agent who was on the ground in Afghanistan at the airport in December of 2001. I mean, he went in with some of the first troops. He was a Navy veteran before the FBI, and he was interviewing Al Qaeda and Taliban that were being brought off the battlefield. And he felt this great sense of, man, we turned a corner here really quickly. The military did its job. We've got the FBI and the CIA working together. We're on the ground here. We're literally in these old broken rooms that they've fashioned into interrogation rooms, and they were making progress. And I spoke to him last week. You'll hear his voice in our show, and people like that kind of go, look, I was on the ground there 20 years ago, and now it seems to have come full circle, and we'll know 6 months, a year from now, maybe longer, if Afghanistan goes right back to becoming, a terrorist incubator. And how do we stop that? I don't know that we have the means to stop that right now. And you talk about China going in there and other world actors going in there to exploit that situation. This could be really bad in both the short, medium, and long run.
Goodness. As a native New Yorker, I mean, you FBI, I mentioned earlier, your father and your brother also. I mean, you were all were there, 9/11. God love you. How the news today that actually just from a little bit ago from Jen Psaki's press conference that the president's not going to be making a live address on 9/11. How important is that to you to hear from the commander in chief live on 9/11?
It's just hard to fathom someone who it can be that tone deaf to the feelings of the families. You have children now that were born right after 9/11 whose mothers were pregnant and their fathers died that day. You have all of these people that were affected, myself, my family. You have millions, tens of millions of New Yorkers and Americans that were affected, not just that day, not only in the global war on terror afterwards, but just that day, millions of people. And for the president not to recognize that this is a day that should be acknowledged in a national sense, to see some of the things that he addresses, nationally, and then to say, I'm not going to on the 20th anniversary. This is it's kind of a historic day. I mean, we still have days where we celebrate Pearl Harbor, not celebrate Pearl Harbor, but we remember Pearl Harbor and we remember the attacks there, and we have ceremonies there. And for the president not to address, I think it just sends a message. What does it cost him to actually do a message like that, do a national address that day? It doesn't cost him anything. But when he doesn't do it, it certainly sends a message. And is that the message that he really wants to send to the American people? It's dumbfounding to me.
Bobby Chacon, I appreciate your family, appreciate you and your perspective out there. So good to talk with you. We got to have you on again. Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, Dana. Thanks.
Apparently, folks, some find the Constitution of the United States and the Bill of Rights to be so upsetting, so triggering, that now the National Archives Records Administration has placed, I'm not exaggerating this, a harmful content warning label on it. Yes, on that. We're going to tell you more about this. You won't believe it. Keep it here. For a couple of years now, we've heard over and over that America is systemically racist and it's an evil nation, blah, blah, blah. We've been told that we're a country whose laws, policies, and institutions, that they were all invented to oppress specifically people of color. Now, this rhetoric, it was once a fringe view that was held by groups like Antifa, or the admitted Marxists that created BLM. But now it forms the very platform of the Democrat Party. So it's not a surprise that our very Constitution and our Bill of Rights now comes with, get this, harmful language warning from the National Archives Records Administration. Yes, they put that label on the Constitution. It needs to come with a harmful language warning, according to NRA. Or NARA, rather. That group, that agency, is responsible for preserving and protecting documentation of American heritage. Noted that so-called harmful historical documents, quote, it could, quote, reflect racist, sexist, ableist, misogynistic, misogyny noir, and xenophobic opinions and attitudes, be discriminatory towards or exclude diverse views on sexuality, gender, religion, and more. And they're not done. Include graphic content of historical events such as violent death, medical procedures, crime, wars, terrorist attacks, natural disasters, and more, end quote. If you were unsure as to whether or not you're living through a cultural revolution, add this to the stack of evidence. It's eerily similar to the memory holing that the Maoists did in China. From 1966 to 1976, the Chinese Cultural Revolution was a socio-political movement that sought to reimpose Maoist thought and excise impure elements and ideologies from the political and social order. Sounds familiar. During the French Revolution, similar tactics were used, like pulling down statues, renaming streets, even restarting the calendar at year one. The point being, in cultural revolutions, everything pre-revolution must be discredited, must be torn down and memory holed. And when you've gotten to the point where you're putting signs over the Constitution, warning labels, telling people that it contains harmful language, you have to wonder how far down the revolutionary rabbit hole we've already gone. And of course, it's a change that's being instituted under the Biden administration, who talks incessantly of whiteness and white supremacy being some sort of existential threat to the United States. Now, oddly, it's reported that the NARA harmful language warning doesn't appear on a page about Jim Crow. which has no fewer than 6 uses of a racial slur, the N-word, nor does it appear on a page with the K-word that's used as a slur towards Jewish people. Makes you wonder why that would be so. Maybe because they wouldn't want to discourage people from reading something that might help form a negative opinion about America, perhaps? In any case, this isn't the first time the National Archives has catered to a leftist view of history. The National Archives Racism Task Force pushed to include trigger warnings around displays of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, all of which are in the rotunda. Now, along with committing to diversity and equity, the NARA said it would, quote, in conjunction with diverse communities, seek to balance the preservation of this history with sensitivity to how these materials are presented to and perceived by users, end quote. That's that new American value again, diversity. Increasingly, diversity of everything but thought. It takes precedence over our actual founding values, liberty and equality. Diversity demands not actual diversity, but Marxist presentation of diversity says we have to apologize for our history and take ownership of things that people did even when you weren't here because your family hadn't even immigrated yet. Why? Because some group or person might be offended by America's founding documents. It's so incredibly Orwellian, but the revolution is complete when the language is perfect. These were the kinds of things that you thought were confined only to progressive college campuses, but it's now happening in our very own National Archives Records Administration, whose job is to preserve our history, not apologize for it. So now when you read about harmful notions like all men created equal, it will come with a trigger warning. But just remember, the only thing the Constitution and Bill of Rights is harmful to are despots and authoritarians who want to rule over you. That does it for us tonight. Thanks for tuning in. Good night, and don't bend the knee.